Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we are bringing you day 295 of this Russian invasion into Ukraine, with Olexiy Arestovych, advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel, and Mark Feygin, Russian opposition politician. In today's stream, they discuss situation on the front, they comment on the interview of General Zaluzhny about the next 2-3 months, and the expectations of arrival additional 200,000 of Russian reserves. They discuss the dwindling potential of Russian army. Belarus, no immediate threat, however there are possible provocations, and what else should be expected from the northern border. European Union is in agreement on the ninth package of anti-Russian sanctions, despite veto of Hungary, personal sanctions from America, and self-cleansing of the West from pro-Putin's agents. Is the United States planning to acknowledge Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism? And the resolution in the United Nations about exclusion of Russian Federation from the Security Council. Enjoy! Dear viewers, glad to see you all on Feigin Live. It is Thursday, December 15th. Time is 1 minute past 10 in Kiev and 1 minute past 11 in Moscow. And we're doing our usual stream. Today is, don't see it, sorry, day 295 with Olexiy Arestovych. Olexiy, glad to see you. Good evening, Mark. Good evening, everybody. We have 80,000 watching us, over 20,000 click the like button. Big ask to those who are joining, please continue sharing the links in your social media and other groups where you communicate with friends. Those who are watching us from Russia, don't post it online, send it through Messenger to your friends. If you can reach those who are at risk of being mobilized, let them watch the real stream with real data. It is upon you to make sure that information spreads as wide as it can. And of course, subscribe to Feigin Live. And to Olexiy Arestovych and to the Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that stream in English language. We all appreciate your support. Okay, let's go to the map, Olexiy. What can you tell us about the day we missed? What happened on the front? Geographically, we did not capture anything significant. However, we did make several significant hits on some targets, starting from Kherson region, going all the way through Zaporozhye to the Kharkov border. We reached them in the depth of Lugansk as well. There were 2 days of very successful hits when the number of perished soldiers and officers of our opponent is counted at dozens or maybe even hundreds. We got at least 2 big warehouses and the effectivity was pretty high. Main fighting is still going a bit to the south of Bakhmut, a bit to the north of Solidar. Those fights are heavy, close-range infantry fights. On the eastern flank of Bakhmut, they pushed a little further. But you need to understand, they're pushing further, we're pushing them back, they're pushing back. So that's how it's going there. And on the part of the front, a bit north of Svatova, down to Kremenaya, Russian command is trying to figure out how to do any offensive maneuvers there. We block them and we do our counteroffensive maneuvers. Yesterday, 13 Shaheds flew at us from Belarus. We shot all 13 down. And that's generally what happened. Okay. Let's then go over the news, if that pretty much describes the situations and news from the front. We have 164,000 already watching us. Guys, continue to join the stream and help us push it to the tops of YouTube, day 295 of this war. Okay, look, Zaluzhny gave an interview to The Economist. The head of Command. No. Sergei Sheptala is the head of General Command. Zaluzhny is the General Command of the Defense Forces. Okay, yes, you're correct. I stand corrected. So the question... Oh, sorry, I misspoke. Shaheds came from the south, not from Belarus. Those 13 that were shot down. Okay, good for correcting. So Zaluzhny said several things. First of all, he said that Moscow can create plans about intervening even from Belarus. He said that Moscow has a reserve, and that reserve is the mobilized, and they should not be underestimated. I'm just conveying the general message of that interview, that indeed can become a factor which Moscow is using to the max to achieve some success both on Donbass and on the Belarus side, maybe. And among other things that we heard, they were understood with a meaning that the war is not going to be won tomorrow. It will take time and a lot of effort still to put an end to that war. Who... You said they were soberly accepted by the audience. I was watching different commentary by different media after that. So the general of his level of Zaluzhny cannot afford himself to be optimistic. His statements are very careful, very cautious. There was definitely no optimism, excessive optimism in his speech. Okay, so you need a commentary here. Yes, absolutely. Well, it is simple. The fact itself that Russia is mobilizing, Russia is buying Iranian munitions and uniforms, means in itself that after losing the first 2 rounds of this conflict, Russian political leadership did not lose their appetites. They changed some goals of this operation, of this war in general, but they have not refused from achieving something else to be able to claim that operation is a success. In their case, it is still capture of Lugansk, capture of Donetsk regions. They are concentrating their most of efforts in that area. They found a social technology which allows them basically to gather inmates in tens of thousands, cleanse the prisons, and we heard that in the intercepts. They're talking about cleansing Russian society, and covered by these forces of mobilized inmates who are just being given 3 clips of bullets to their AKs, and while they're dying there, trying to reach our infantry in their trenches, they are training, they're mobilized, and they're buying more ammo, they're buying more uniforms and supplies from Iran. So, after losing on several occasions, there were several retreats. I think overall we can count 5 different ones. And right now they're in a position when initially their group was about 330,000 or something like that, if not to count the Donetsk and Lugansk republics people. And they now have about 200 mobilized as well, right? So in Ukraine, we have roughly, about 1 million mobilized, serving in different kinds of defense forces. They have on their side at about 200,000, realistically 175,000 on our territory. If they bring all the mobilized to that, they maybe can get up to 400,000, even if they throw everything in the fight. That'll be not more than 400,000. We can still mobilize more if we need to. Our mobilization is still going. We're not doing it in mass. We're just following the plans and getting people with certain military specialties to fulfill their duties. But anyway, in this proportion, we have them at half our size. Even if you look at Bakhmut and Soledar, they have 40 battalion tactical groups. That's about 38,000 people. So imagine there'll be 5 more areas like that, hot like that. So on one hand, that will be a problem, right? On the other hand, let's look at the quality of this army. Most of them will be mobilized, even though they are preparing them and training them, and probably doing it pretty well because they are changing and pushing dates further out because they're trying to make them pass exams and actually learn something. In the meantime, inmates are buying them this time. But we need to understand that these people are being trained, they are mobilized anyway. They're not professionals. The quality of their equipment, quality of armor, is weaker than as it was in the beginning. Artillery, they cannot do 60,000 shells daily, they cannot even do 40,000. Their guns are worn out and less accurate. This is still a considerable force, but compared with the initial group that invaded the country, their battle worthiness is significantly lower. Ukrainian military and our quality and our ability to resist grew substantially from the beginning. We got more precise, more high-quality Western arms. Our skills, our experience grew in the last 9 months. So what do I see? What do I foresee here? The next, attention, 2-3 months will, according to the ideations of Russian command, will probably remind us what happened between the second half of April and the beginning of July, when our military were sitting in deep defense on most of the parts of the front, and Russian army was taking some settlements, some towns, by wasting thousands of their troops trying to get them. And those troops were much higher quality. There was Wagner made of their best fighters, not from inmates. They were professional storm infantry, they were professional airborne troops and special forces. In 2 months, after wasting tens of thousands of people, they took Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, and Popasная. That's it. What about Kurdyumovka? Yes, Kurdyumovka as well. Of course, they were less than 200,000. Now the threat will be higher, but this threat is not linear. There'll be more in quantity, there'll be lesser in quality. We don't know exact their fighting qualities until they are on the front and showing who they are. Here, Zaluzhny, being a professional military, is commenting it from the pessimistic scenario, that is a professional attitude of military. I'm a professional too, but I'm a little more optimistic, and I'm not in his position, so I'm still a bit optimistic about how it will go, but still, 200,000 is a significant risk. If they do end up buying ballistic missiles from Iran, as our partners are warning us, they can, and if they combine the strikes with these missiles and their attack, it'll be a pretty difficult time for us. Now, speaking of where, they of course will reinforce the Eastern Front. They likely will try to, they would love to try to attack Kiev. They think in their own framework, they think that Russia is a centralized country. So if you take over the center, if you take over Kiev and the center of command, the whole resistance topples. Oh yeah, I'm quite sure in their analytic materials, that's exactly how they present it. If Kiev falls, the whole resistance in Ukraine ceases to exist. Well, the thing is, Kiev will not fall. We are not sitting doing nothing, we're preparing. And one also need to understand that our troops were fighting in Kharkov, on the west, on the east, in the south, without much consideration to what's happening in Kiev. Of course, if Kiev falls, that'll be a blow to morale, but they will still fighting. They will still continue fighting on their fronts, they're not running. Again, to take Kiev, Russia would need to aggregate, or even to attempt to take Kiev, Russia would need to aggregate at least 50-60,000 troops. You need to create reserves, equipment, gather them. Even if you decide to do it right now and in force, it will take at least 2 months to gather such a group. So in any case, it is further pushed out, and in the next 2 months, there'll be a lot of different events that may distract them. So summing it up, they would love to attack Kiev. They potentially have a way to do that, but they're still far away from being capable. And this is where Zaluzhny was commenting on our needs. He said 300 tanks, 700 armored vehicles, 500 howitzers. Yes, he went at the minimum level. Basically, he was referring that Ukraine is not capable of doing several offensive operations, but everything is ready for one. He did not clarify the direction, but we have our suspicions. Of course he won't, right? But even one such operation can change the disposition on the front and shuffle their plans and make them use some of these 200,000 in different places where they initially intended to. And we're not going to sit here and wait till they prepare these folks and throw them in the front however they like. We are going to command them where to put these troops. So nobody's going to wait for them to come to Kiev or other places. We'll be meeting them and we'll be doing some proactive operations because, like Sun Tzu said, the best quality, the best feature of the commander is to destroy the plans of an enemy. The lowest is to take their cities. They will be trying to take our cities and will be destroying their plans. So, summing it up, it will be some sort of repetition of May, June, especially if they'll continue adding ballistic missiles and keep hitting our infrastructure. It's a bit more difficult to intercept ballistic missiles. This is why there are more conversations happening about French anti-missile defense systems and Patriot systems that are capable of shooting down those Iranian missiles that may be used on the front. But please don't go in despair. I was checking some of the forums today and the morale of some people is starting to drop. Oh, these are the questions. This is why you're asking me. Yep, because I saw that there's definitely a change in temperature. And I'm trying to be careful about how people comment Zaluzhny statements, because I've seen different ones. I've seen optimistic, pessimistic, I've seen different. So, Mark, summing it up, it will not be easy. It will definitely not be easy, but it will not be as horrible as the first several months of this war. And another good news, when these 200,000 will be out, and they will run out of them. For example, in Bakhmut Solidar, in the last 3 months, they lost about 60,000 dead and wounded, just fighting for 2 small towns. And of course, 60,000 is a mix of both dead, wounded, sanitary losses, all kind of. But that's about a third of these 200,000. And what did they take? 2 towns? They didn't even take them. So on one hand, that seems to be a lot. On the other hand, we'll see how effective they'll be. So overall, this group there is about 40,000, and they've lost 60. And they haven't taken those towns. So on one hand, 200,000 is a lot, but on the other side, on the other hand, according to the scale of this conflict, is not too crazy much. So it will not be easy. It will be difficult if it's combined with the hits on infrastructure, if the missiles will be supplied and if they'll be effective. If we fail to shoot them down, then they can cause us enough harm. But our leadership, President, General Command, they're not going to sit and wait like passive targets waiting for Russians to come to the front and start hitting us where they like. So we'll be taking our measures. Our partners are activating as well. There are discussions about support of new nomenclature, more equipment. They're not being officially loudly declared, but we're talking about anti-missile defense, air defense, some jets from the Eastern Europe and Slovakia. So we tighten the belts, keep our noses high, and keep walking towards the victory. I'm kind of following the words I mentioned at the first days of war. There is another interesting side of the story. I have a question to the Russian Federation. Are they ready for the third wave and another 200,000 wave after the second wave is grinded out? I have suspicions, and I have based suspicions that they are probably not. And I think this is the last serious attempt they will manage to aggregate at our front. And after their failure, those long-awaited processes, which I have called a crisis of capabilities of Russian social system to create super efforts. For now, they've tried to do that. They still can, perhaps, with a lower food rations and poor equipment, they can still do the second wave like that. But I sincerely doubt their capability to do the third. They might get some missiles, they might get a little more equipment, but I'm thinking if they even decide or somehow manage to aggregate the third wave, it'll be probably half of the second. And chances are they'll still try, because they're idiots and they'll be gambling till the last pence in this casino. So our main task is to defeat them in this offensive, play our own game. We have our own game here to play, follow the words of General Zaluzhny, and we will preserve potential for offensive and actually will increase it during that time. And I sincerely doubt the capabilities of the Russian Federation to keep or create enough reserves for anything after that. And that's when the situation will flip. Somewhere around winter. Oh, sorry, spring. We are at about 21 minute live. Your mic is sometimes touching your sweater, your jacket, and some people are throwing darts at me in the chat for that. So please ask Mark to correct his mic. Okay, let's talk about Belarus. I know you're skeptical about what's happening there, but still Belarus is preparing for the war against Ukraine. And Olexiy Gromov, representative of General Command of Ukraine, made that statement. Ukraine continues preparing the northern regions, territorial defense, and so blah blah. Okay, that's it. So what do you think? With that statement and with what Zaluzhny said, are we closer to the offensive from Belarus? And it might not be Belarus troops. Or is it still a perspective that is coming and going? What's happening right now, do you think? So in Intel, there are two separate disciplines. They became separated after the War of Judgment Day, when Egypt suddenly attacked Israel, when Israel actually knew about that sudden probability and why the same people who 6 years earlier were so correct in gauging the intentions, and in the 6-Day War they destroyed all the enemies. And here they almost failed, and the whole existence of Israel was hanging by a thread. The blow was severe. Although if Israel hit them preemptively, they could have repeated the 6-Day War. So there was a disconnect between gauging the capabilities and the intentions. And with gauging the capabilities, all intel services of the world are pretty much the same. They gauge it, somebody a little better, somebody a little worse, but they're at about the same level. And about the subjective side of things, you as an attorney, you probably know. Motive, ideation, yes, intent. It's much harder to guess. It's a similar situation here with military. And of course, they are trying to give that capability to Belarus. Of course, they would be advantageous if they managed to drag some Belarus army into that conflict. Border guards, military, anybody, when they're actually shooting at us, and we shoot back at them. Of course, they would try that, but current Belarus leadership, in the face of Alexander Lukashenko, is very actively resisting that. And they're doing everything to avoid that. And they're usually doing it in the following manner. They're doing different intrigues on the international arena. They're negotiating with NATO countries, with China, with Russia, and then they're doing some measures which are basically being used as the bone thrown to a dog. See, we're doing some capacity training, we're doing some tests, we're creating some territorial defense, we're creating some additional defenses on the border. Our observers, and some of them are alarmists. Of course, General Gromov was making a statement. He's a professional. He sees through that. But there are some bloggers commenting that tomorrow is. I actually saw that post today. Belarus attacks us tomorrow. So they see all the preparations and they think that that's what's happening. Of course, Russia would love to attack us from the north. They would love to use Belarus to attack us as well. But wanting and being able to are two different categories. Even if they start forming that group tomorrow, it'll take them at least 2 months. And creation of that group is only a creation of capability. And using it as having an intent to use it is another big question. And with not knowing what's going to be happening in the south or in the east, it'll be another question where to throw that group, where it will be direly needed. And let's separate the wants and the cans, because a lot of things may happen in this chain, in this logical chain, that will preclude that attack from the north. So, once again, there is no threat from the north. There is a theoretical threat, but there is no practical threat. There even can be provocations, yes, but right now, Belarus even precludes shelling from the territory of Belarus. All that is coming from Russia. Belarus professional military are sabotaging all that, same as Lukashenko himself. Situation is changing rather rapidly. Different factors and different eventualities that may happen in the east or in the south may cause Russian command to use these troops down there. And even creation of such a group doesn't mean that it will be thrown to be utilized immediately. That it can be used as the factor of providing additional pressure. So translating all that into a simple language, it's 50-50. And there is a threat. There is definitely a threat, a possible threat from the north, but there is still some time that needs to pass until it materializes. And the intentions are still questionable because they may be emergently needed somewhere in the east or somewhere in the south. When this threat will start shaping up, our general command, myself and others will not be quiet. We will be considering and talking about that. Yes, the threat is real, then we'll say, and we are taking measures. Actually, we are taking measures even now. If you can take a look at what the head of civil and military side of civil administration of Kiev, the measures that he is taking. He is a high-level professional. He's taking extraordinary measures from possible future threats. So nobody is waiting passively. Along the whole border, Belarus and Ukraine border, Chernigov, Sumy, all these regions are working and doing their work, doing our preparations. It soon will be the 10th month of this war. We have learned a lot. We have our plans that we're following through with, and our enemy will never be as strong as he was as of May, June of this past year, even with these additional hundreds of thousands of fighters. Okay, let's continue. I just got a message that in my stream here that the 9th package from European Union, 9th package of sanctions, has been finalized. And Kremlin was, for a few days, cheerfully smiling that EU cannot go through with that. And apparently they did. Also, there were some personal sanctions, and America is targeting Batanin, Vice Prime Minister in Belarus, and some governors in Russia, most governors of the regions that were involved in mobilizations. So Russian governors Alekhanov, Artamonov, Avdiyev, Azarov, Bocharov, etc. All the known last names. But it's good that it's going down to regional level, that sanction policy and United States are on the same page with that. They're also including these persons in that list. What is still not clear is finalization of the price level for the natural gas corridor, but I have a feeling they will find an agreement because everybody was saying no, they'll not be able to vote for the ninth package. They're not in agreement on that, but look, here they are. You know what I like in this story, Mark, is how Europe is avoiding the veto of Hungary. Do you have some commentary on that, how they're doing it? I don't know how they're doing it, but 17 billion that were initially blocked by Hungary, all of a sudden they were agreed upon. So I'm thinking they probably push on Hungary to a degree and then maybe go around it. They maybe found a scheme to not include it. Remember, we talked about the sixth package of sanctions. It was a long and sad story. I think it was in summer, right? It was a very slow push, slow churn. Europe cannot go so far. Europe is running out of its potential to slap more sanctions. And look, it was sixth and seventh and eighth and now ninth. And I'm thinking they will close this year with the ninth package, and they'll cut Russian natural gas as well, and then they'll start managing the price corridor as well to try to preclude Russia from shooting Iranian missiles. So here, besides the housewives in this situation, we also have husbands of housewives, and many of them are in pretty high rank, right? From our audience. Oh, they're also watching us? Yeah, they are. So many of them are generals from our Ukrainian military. And they're texting me here saying, well, you mentioned Zaluzhny, you mentioned all kind of military, but what about intel? They're bugging me to make a note about intel. Well, indeed, and it's my professional defamation. The main task of intel is to preclude or to prevent or to warn the country about the possibility of a military threat from across the border. And those people who are planning to attack us back in the day, they probably forgot to calculate that we do have that service, and there are some officers in the intel, each of whom is worth probably 10 tank divisions with their decisions and information given on time and data analytics. So cheers to you, colleagues. Keep doing the good work. So going back to the sanctions package, at the moment, I think 9th will pass through pretty quickly, and then there'll be 10th, and then there'll be more. And what one needs to understand, let's take the international contour. There is that risk of 200,000 running across the border to us, and probable heavy fighting on February, and some hits on our infrastructure. What do you think? What mood does it add to the collective West? What mood? Tell me, Olexiy. It'll confirm their understanding that Putin is a complete asshole. I think they already know that. Yeah, the borderline skeptics, the ones who are still on the fence, they will understand that those who are playing the line of let's look in his face, play business as usual, let's try to negotiate, those will people who find themselves acting against the collective NATO and Europe. By the way, we'll keep discovering more atrocities. We found a torture room for underage people, for kids, a torture room for kids in Kherson. So all these lovers of doing business as usual with Putin's Russia, with those who torture underage kids, their policies will not fall through. They will not be able to actively resist and actively support Putin's regime, because our NATO allies are strong intent on precluding Russia from winning in this war. And if you notice, there are more and more news coming out about support for the international tribunals here and there. And all of our allies on the West are already starting to ask questions. Is it just ideological resistance, or is there any corruption hidden behind it? Yeah, vice president also of European Parliament. That's what I'm pointing my fingers at. There are other figures that are on the radar of investigations, so I'm just putting that on the radar. Those who are actively supporting Putin's regime out there, Europe is going to start to look under the stones and turn them over and see what's hiding behind that statement, behind the statements of those who try to support Putin. Look, Germany, they already nationalized two companies that were heavily Russian funded. And Poland recently voted to take Russia as the terrorist state. Europe acknowledged that there is a genocide in Ukraine. And what I'm going to say that what some talking heads for Putin do not understand, perhaps after the arrest of that vice president who was supporting Putin's politics, perhaps they'll start to understand, because Putin's politics and his idiocy is breaking through all of the possible norms. The West starts to realize that they need to cleanse themselves from his agents. And those people who are supporting Putin, who are part of his corrupt network throughout the world, may find themselves together with Putin and his regime in that international tribunal. Because if I was part of the judgment core on that tribunal, I would be asking questions. What motivated these people to block support to Ukrainian citizens while they are being tortured in basements? What motivated people to vote against support to people who are recovering from previous tortures, rapes, from their families being murdered in front of them? And those people who are voting for that, they realize that this money was, it's not even a military support, it's pure economic support for citizens. So, yeah, I just suggest look deeper. I want to warn these pro-Putin's players who love to play nothing is so black and white. They may find themselves in a very precarious situation. And the West will start, I see that they are starting to look at themselves and start cleansing themselves. I'm reminding that, remember when Donetsk and Lysychansk were happening, the first Rammstein was during the storm of Popasna back in May. Now everything is set as a system. We are getting new arms. The West is slowly but getting back to revive its military production, to increase it. Everything will be all right. It will be difficult, but it will be okay at the end. And from the support of the West, and from the position of the G7, and the general change of politics and treatment of Russia in the international arena. And while Putin is trying to push with his macho line, as he was trained in his books about passionate approach to the matter, they will find it at the end. Russia will find themselves without pants, and those who, at the end of this war, and who will be alive, they'll be sitting on a little bench somewhere in the park, taking a breather, but there'll be very few of them left, because before that they'll also go through some serious infighting. And all these stories with Iranian missiles and everything being used against us here, this is a story for the International Tribunal. That's where it all leads. But only for those who survive the war and survive the inner fighting after that. All right, so we've been live for about 37 minutes. Please continue sharing links and subscribing to Feigin Live, to Olexiy Arestovych, and to the Privateer station if you are listening or watching that in English. Okay. Poland acknowledged Russia as a terrorist, as a state sponsor of terrorism. You came back from Poland. Did you meet somebody there? Mark, I don't travel for leisure. I travel on business. Well, I see you traveled well. So the question in that basket, on the background of generally increasing position of acknowledging Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, do you think position of United States will change as well about this matter? Or is it off limits for a while? We understand that there are secondary sanctions and other things connected to that in relation to the United States. Well, Mark, United States have their own levers and their own mechanisms to deal with it. I was driving today, I was reading some snippets of news, didn't have much time, but I saw that Senate in States is planning to review the resolution to kick Russian Federation from the Security Council, permanent members of Security Council of United Nations. Rather authoritative news agency from America, confirmed that. So that's a serious development. Here's also a question of what is stronger, acknowledgement of state sponsor of terrorism or kicking out of permanent membership of Security Council? Thing is, we know that American law about acknowledging the country as a state sponsor of terrorism implies that a lot of different measures, including financials, need to be implemented against the country itself and those countries that are actively trading with such state. And in this case, we have India and China who are actively trading with Russian Federation. And they're also in complicated codependent relations with the United States. So, according to American law, in this case, they would have to slap sanctions on India and China, and this might increase and deepen the international crisis, which is not part of American plans, I think, at this point. European declaration of Russia being a state sponsor of terrorism doesn't follow with much of the legal sanctions after that. It's more of a statement. American statement of calling Russia state sponsor of terrorism actually brings a lot of secondary sanctions with it. So America wouldn't bother to slap that against Russia, but right now they're not ready to follow through with these sanctions with India and China. If they'll be ready at some point to do that, they will, but right now they don't and aren't. They have other mechanisms, including additional limitations and setting price corridors on oil and gas and so on and so on. Okay, so we've been live almost 41 minutes. Are you back? You're here? Everything is good for tomorrow? We're doing a stream? Yes, everything is good. Okay, wonderful. Tomorrow is Friday, end of the week. Damn, these weeks are flying fast. But we'll discuss other topics tomorrow. Thank you, dear viewers, who were with us these almost 40 minutes. We ask you to please continue clicking the like button and subscribing to that stream and to our channels Olexiy Arestovich, Feigin Live, and Privateer Station. Alright, see you tomorrow, Olexiy. Thank you for the information. Have a good day. Thank you, and see you tomorrow, Mark. Everything will be alright.